What is the big factor that separates those runners who hit the wall and those who don't? 56% of us non-elite runners are destined to confront the wall during our next marathon, which adds 30 minutes to our finish time. But the elites seem superhuman and rarely succumb to this phenomenon. But why? What do they know that we don't? Let's go through the research and uncover what separates the elites from us Run Smarter scholars, including one easy trick that you'll use straight away to avoid hitting the wall. But before that, let's get on the same page by discussing what the wall actually is. While the definition and mechanism differs in the literature, most papers describe it as a sudden and significant slowing, and it's believed in this moment in your marathon is when the glycogen supplies have been exhausted and your body has to switch to using fat as the primary energy source. Think of it like a hybrid car running efficiently on electricity, and suddenly the battery dies and the engine has to switch to a less efficient petrol method. With your legs now switching to petrol, you'll start to notice physical symptoms like pain and illness, cramping and fatigue. But keep in mind also that your brain runs on glycogen to function. And as a result, runners also report cognitive impairment, such as frustration, confusion, and losing the battle against their mind. Now we know the mechanism, let's go through ways you can combat it. Firstly, we can't ignore the training element of getting through the necessary mileage and getting to the start line in the best shape possible to give you the physical and psychological boost that you need. This is like gradually converting your family-sized hybrid car into a slick, efficient racing car. As this paper illustrated, training volume characteristics such as the distance of your longest training run and your mileage per week are inversely related to reports of hitting the wall. This suggests that runners may be able to mitigate the effects of hitting the wall by increasing any or all aspects of training volume. So let's reverse engineer this. We want to get to the start line with the largest fitness base possible. So we need to get through marathon training and negotiate the peak weeks without disruption. That means keeping fit and healthy without injury. And we know that running related injuries are primarily due to abrupt changes in training load that exceeds our capacity to adapt. But trying to avoid these abrupt changes by just calculating your weekly mileage has major limitations because it doesn't factor in training elements like how fast you run, your terrain, or any other cross-training loads. So the solution is learning how to construct and monitor your training volume to avoid spikes in these training loads. And I have the perfect tip for you. First, become familiar with the RPE, or rate of perceived exertion, so you can accurately rate your level of perceived effort. For instance, the bulk of your training should be set at an RPE of around about 3 out of 10. Next, go back on your previous 2 weeks and multiply the average RPE by the minutes of that session. This will give you the total exercise units per session based on mileage and intensity. Next, add all of these up to create the weekly total. Now you have a tangible number highlighting how many exercise units you have completed and therefore can tolerate. Now you can plan out future weeks by assigning an RPE to your mileage and ensure no abrupt spikes are seen. For most, a 10 to 15% increase should be safe, with having the odd recovery week if required, but you'll need to keep listening to your body and see what percentage increase is best for you. Now remember, the previous paper also mentioned the longest training run as a factor. In fact, this paper found the longest training run was the most robust predictor for those hitting the wall or not. I've covered the long run in detail in a previous video, but to summarize, the longest training run leading up to a marathon should be around about 20 miles or 3 hours, whichever one comes first. Research seems to show this distance is the magic sweet spot that challenges your body enough without the need to take a week off for recovery and severely disrupting your momentum. For bonus points, you can do a 10 to 15 mile moderate run the day before your scheduled long run, and this will cause pre-fatigue in the legs and better prepare you for the fatigue you're going to experience in the marathon. This is important because out of those who hit the wall, 73% comes after the 19-mile mark. So make sure you put in the necessary mileage. However, as we mentioned earlier, hitting the wall is believed to be caused by a switch in your energy stores. So you could put in all the hard work in training, but our hybrid car is still destined to fail if we don't charge the battery the night before. This paper can help us with the battery charging process and suggests that carb loading prior to the marathon can assist in maintaining greater speeds before hitting the wall. Luckily, Steph Natchek, also known as @Steph the Runner's Dietitian, is a good friend of the Run Smarter podcast, so I asked for some practical tips on carb loading. She mentioned if the race is around about 2 hours long, to carb load for 24 to 48 hours. But if it's 3+ hours like a marathon, a 3-day carb load is better. She mentioned 10 to 12 grams per kilogram of body weight is ideal in this carb loading phase, and to consume foods that are high in carbs, low in fat, and include some moderate protein. Her suggestions was to stick to foods like breads, fruits, pastas, rice, potatoes, and beverages like fruit juice, chocolate milk, and sports drinks. And also pair this with lean protein like eggs, chicken, beans and lentils, yogurt, or cottage cheese. Once your battery is at full charge, continuing to top up mid-race is a must to maintain maximum aerobic speed. However, this paper says that your goal is to consume the minimum amount of carbs during the race that is required to avoid hitting the wall. In other words, you don't want to overconsume and face a lot of gut issues down the track. This paper also mentions that finding the balance requires personalized prescription, to which requires a lot of complex and intimidating calculations. However, the general rule of thumb is to take 30 to 60 grams of carbs every 60 minutes throughout the race. Don't make the mistake of consuming your gels when fatigue is kicking in. This is often way too late because in a fatigue state, the blood flow is redirected to the legs and away from your gut, which usually just means this gel that you take is just going to sit in your stomach without being absorbed, and it will make you really unwell. But 30 to 60 grams every hour is just a rough guideline. So hopefully you're practicing with gels during your training runs to hone in on your most effective strategy. For example, if your stomach can't tolerate 60 grams every hour, you might want to try 30 grams every half hour. There is another important element on fueling which I haven't covered yet, and that is optimizing your hydration status. This also requires a fine balance. Too little and you become dehydrated, and that will just derail your race day. But too much and you can feel sick and even suffer a serious condition known as hyponatremia. But again, prescription needs to be tailored because everyone has different sweat rates and can be influenced by things like your exercise intensity, the weather on the day, and also what clothing you're wearing. I discuss an easy way to determine your sweat rate and your hydration strategy in this video, which I'll include in the description. Okay, so now you're on the start line, your battery is fully charged, and you have an effective fueling strategy on how to recharge throughout the race. Your next objective is to get from the start line to the finish line in the most efficient way possible. After all, you don't want to drain your battery too quickly, and on the other hand, you don't want too much energy left in the tank when you cross the finish line. That could have been energy better spent on the course, contributing to a faster marathon time. This brings me to your pacing strategy, which refers to your game plan on how fast you want to run throughout each segment of the marathon. This is important when it comes to avoiding hitting the wall. After all, men are way more likely to hit the wall, mainly because they're more likely to overestimate their abilities, leading to more aggressive and risky pacing strategies. And when it comes to the most efficient marathon in the fastest possible time, you want to aim for an even split. That being, if you want to run a 4-hour marathon, you should aim to get to the halfway mark in 2 hours and so on. If you have successfully negotiated the wall and still have reserves in your battery, you can pick up the pace in the final miles. This creates a potential for you to negative split, which just means that your second half has been faster than your first half. If this is your first marathon and you're unsure of what pace would be appropriate, take your best half marathon time, double it, and then add 10 minutes if you're a good runner, or add 20 minutes for recreational runners. Then calculate the even split from there. For a deeper look into your marathon pacing strategy, I'll include this link in the description for you to check out. Okay, lean in here because it's time to uncover the secret that separates the wall avoiding elites from the wall hitting non-elites. And it all has to do with your interpretation and response to your body signals mid-race. Let me explain. The authors of this paper interviewed elites and non-elite runners about their opinions and responses of the wall. And the findings were black and white. Let's start with the non-elites, who reported that hitting the wall was inevitable and can only be endured by dissociating body signals. In other words, just distracting themselves from the pain. However, the elites described the wall as a myth and said instead of distraction, runners should do the opposite and tune into their body signals to make the necessary adjustments in pace, and if done correctly, the symptoms of the wall can be avoided. This theory seems to hold up with two papers that I found. The first showing that those who used distraction techniques during the race were more likely to hit the wall, and another paper that reported the biggest predictor of hitting the wall was the expectation beforehand of hitting the wall. This effect seems that self-confidence and self-efficacy may play a contributing factor, which is a trait that also separates the elites from the non-elites. But I think all of this goes hand in hand. If you've got through the necessary mileage in your training and you have a promising pacing and fueling strategy in place, this will significantly boost your self-confidence and therefore your ability to perform. On the mindset side of things, learn to listen to your body like the elites do. There may be subtle early signs that you're running too fast, or that you just tackled that last hill too aggressively, or you're starting to overheat slightly. Just tune in and make little micro adjustments to your game plan rather than fighting through the alarm bells and trying to distract yourself from the pain. The one thing I haven't covered yet, if you want to avoid hitting the wall, is to execute the perfect taper, which is just like a down phase in training leading up to the event. And if you've made the right adjustments, you'll hit that perfect sweet spot between top fitness and maximum recovery. But making the perfect adjustments requires a little bit more explanation. Luckily, I've created the video with that explanation, so click here now and I'll see you over there.